And no one seems to want to talk about it. Even now, no one's talking about it. But the truth of the matter is that we are entering into an era of automation where it will become cheaper to have machines do an AI, whether it's an online machine or whether it's an actual robot, do human jobs, meaning that we are looking at a future where unemployment is going to go even higher than it is now, and capitalism as we know it becomes completely unsustainable. If that's based on people working and getting paychecks, there won't be any more jobs. And so this idea of universal basic income, it seems to be the only logical solution. The other one, I guess, just being chaos. But can you talk a little bit about what the future looks like when AI and robots are taking all of the jobs and there isn't universal basic income and people aren't being supported or sustained? What would that future look like?
It would be miserable and violent, truly. And some of the examples I use are the 2 million plus Americans who work at call centers right now. We know that Google has AI that can do the work of the average call center worker. So their days are numbered. And then what happens to those people and those families? One of the jobs I talked about on the trail was driving a truck. It's the most common job in over half the country. And what happens when the trucks eventually start being able to drive themselves? So if we don't start making massive adjustments, you're going to wind up with a war-torn country of people who don't have a means of supporting themselves outside of really, there's like no means of supporting themselves in many instances. And the most common jobs in the country you can sense right now are diminishing in number, where two of them are retail clerk, and you know that a lot of the stores are going online and closing. And then the other is administrative and clerical, which a lot of that paper shuffling is going to get eliminated by AI and technology. So it's gruesome, man. I mean, I was talking about this stuff running for president in 2019 and 2020, and that stuff is sped up because of the pandemic. Over
Yes.
half of companies have come out and said, yeah, I'm investing more in this. And now if you're a customer and you get something delivered to you without talking to a human, you're like, oh, good. Like
Right.
people used to make an argument. It's like, oh, people want to deal with people. It's like, well, I wasn't so sure if that was true even pre-COVID, but now you applaud a company for figuring out a way to do it without a human involved.
That's right. Yes. Well, this is I live in North Carolina. There's the biggest house, I think, in the country here called the Biltmore House. And they have these things called dumb waiters, and the idea was these super rich people, they didn't want to see the servants. You see the servants, you have to feel like, guilty about like the fact that you're enjoying this beautiful house and they're having to work for you. So the way to solve the problem, little food elevators where people from down in the kitchen pull up the food and then you get it. You don't have to interact with them anymore. And so it's a version of that, really. It's like, in that direct interaction with people, at the very least, you have to deal with the fact that somebody's making your hamburger that you're getting. Somebody's making those French fries, and those people are supporting families, and those people aren't getting paid a living wage. And so you have to have some flickering sense of like, that's difficult, that's hard. And so this is something that's going to go away. You won't even see those people anymore. But here's my question about universal basic income. And it's something that one of my spiritual teachers, Ram Dass, he and Tim Leary, they were hanging out in a house after getting fired from Harvard. I think they were taking a lot of acid at the time and going into deep spiritual states of consciousness. But someone came over to the house they were at, and they're just dishes piled up in the sink, flies all over the place. And from that, a slogan emerged, which is someone's got to wash the dishes.
Someone's got to wash the dishes. I during the pandemic, I would look at our sink every day, and this is actually one of the household tasks that I specialize in.
Really?
My wife knows that just just leave the dishes, leave the garbage like that. That's Andrew's jam.
Well, that's a sign of an enlightened person, Like in the Hare Krishna temples, you don't get to only like the only like it's a very special thing if you get to wash the dishes because it's such a service role. Like it's the ultimate service. Nobody wants to wash the dishes, or but enlightened people and all my Buddhist friends are always talking about how beautiful it is to wash dishes. Is this why you wanted to be president? Is it I mean, like everyone is suspicious when someone runs for president. They think this is a megalomaniac. This is a person who just wants power. This is a person who's, anytime the thought is even flickered into my mind, I might run for president. It's like it's a red flag for me. It's like, you got to cut back on the marijuana, friend. You're not running for president. But is this what inspired you to try to get the most difficult job maybe on the planet? You just want to be a servant?
I don't have a burning desire to be president of the United States. Like I didn't even know what I was running. I ran because I thought I could help advance the human condition.
Yeah.
I thought I could accelerate the end of poverty. Imagine waking up, and in my case, it was 2017, thinking, if I put my heart and soul into this, there's a chance I can speed up the end of poverty and alleviate untold human misery. And you think that there is like a 1% chance that you could do that? You probably should do it, right?
Yes.
Now I was a confident fellow, so I thought the chances were higher than 1%, but I wasn't, insane. Like I didn't think that there was like first, I did not think that there was a 51% chance of my becoming president of the United States. And second, I didn't even think there was a 51% chance that I was going to be able to contend the way that I did. And thanks to people like you, like we made 7 debate stages and made a really compelling case. Now a majority of Americans are for universal basic income or some version of it.
Right.
So it was an act of service. I joked like after the campaign ended, it's not like I was at home being like, oh, if I could only be president, I felt like, oh, all right. This is genuinely the way I felt about it, Duncan. So for the better part of 3 years, I was single-minded. I was like, I am going to make this case to the American people and nothing else matters. The only other thing that matters is staying married. 2 jobs and poverty, stay married. As long as those 2 things are on track, nothing else matters.
Yeah.
There was a lot of bullshit, like a lot of stuff where like, it was like a mental trial most days because like I consider myself like a fairly normal person. I know it's crazy to say if you ran for president, but like a person, I wake up in a place and be like, okay, what am I doing today?
Right.
Today I'm in a coffee shop in New Hampshire to try and like, get someone interested in my campaign. Okay, I do this, I do that. Like there's just a lot of tasks. There's a lot of washing dishes, really, if you think about it, like the equivalent. But I was like, if I just grind for 3 years, and I'm an entrepreneur, so you just think, well, I can grind for 3 years.
Right.
Like if I grind for 3 years, there's a non-trivial chance I can help accelerate the end of poverty. Okay,
Wow.
That's the task.
Wow.
And then when the campaign ends, then I'm like, okay, I more or less did what I set out to do. Now what? was really because I was so single-minded. I was just like, I'm gonna do this. And it was interesting. There was part of me that did, Duncan, just want to like right off into the sunset, be like, okay, like I like Andrew Yang made his splash, helped people understand the need for universal basic income. Like now I can resume something else. But you wake up the next day and you realize the problems are still there. And oh, by the way, they're getting worse. And despite the fact that a majority of Americans are now for universal basic income, where we don't have it.
Right.
And so then you think, okay, like how do I keep trying to make it happen? So, then I started an organization. I wrote the book Forward that I'm really glad you liked.
Thanks for sending me a copy. I'm listening to the Audible. I love your reading of it. Is really good. It's really like you did a great job.
Thanks, man. They put me in a recording studio, and I had the mic and the headphones. I pretended I was a rapper. I took a picture of myself. It was fun.
No, you did such a good job. No, it's so. I mean, some people don't like Audible, but if you want to get into the book, I would highly recommend the Audible version. It's wonderful. It's really, really good.
Oh, thanks, man. You can speed it up to 1.25. I can talk a little faster.
I know people who do that. I feel like if you got to speed up your audibles, you need to get into therapy or something. Come on, are you in that in a hurry? You could listen to it normal speed. But we're getting off track here. I want to go back to here's the right now. I know like the subreddit and what's it called, anti-work. You know that subreddit, anti-work.
Familiar, yes.
Well, it's becoming one of the most popular subreddits, you know, and we are witnessing, what are they calling it? The Great Resignation, I think is what they're calling it, where
Yes.
so many people are seemingly having epiphanies about the value of their life versus the value of what they're being paid as an hourly wage at some of these places where they're working, or just the general dehumanization of the worker in some of these companies. People are being treated like shit. They're not being paid anything, and they realize it would probably be better to not have a job. This is a global phenomena. I've read a little bit about it in other places too, where people are just figuring out ways to live at the very bare minimum rather than sell their life energy to corporations to for not enough money to even sustain themselves. So with universal basic income, the place where I wonder who's going to wash the dishes is this is something that is going to have to be rolled out over many, many years. It's going to happen prior to the full automation of everything. So how, in some world where people finally do realize, oh no, this isn't like some silly thing. This is going to be necessary to sustain human society as we know it in an era where technology is becoming increasingly inexpensive and increasingly more powerful. Who does the dishes? Who does these jobs that are not pleasurable or that most people wouldn't want to do, and that to make themselves feel better, they're like, oh, that's a job for high school kids. No, it isn't. These are parents. These are people who are trying to sustain themselves off of 2 or 3 of these jobs. Who does those jobs if everyone is getting a universal basic income and no longer has to do that work?
I've started a number of small businesses, and let's say you start a like a cafe or something along those lines, and you have like different types of people working there. You do a range of different tasks. Some of them very, very thankless and gritty, and the rest of it because you care about the greater project. Now, in my ideal world, people are doing work not because if they stop doing it, they die.
Yes.
Like people have their basic needs met, but then you come together. You work in that cafe anyway. Maybe you get paid a bit more so that like there's a bigger impact on your life, that you're not going home and starving despite the fact that you worked a full day.
Right.
And then some of you, are going to be washing the dishes like in any given day. There are some communities, I don't know if North Carolina is one of them, where where there are frankly like immigrants of various kinds who assume some of the tasks that like a lot of people don't want to spend all of their time doing. And that would be the reality in some contexts. But I do think that imagining deprivation as the motivation for people doing things is a loser over time. If you're like, oh, well, we
Yes.
just have to starve everyone because someone has to wash the dishes. It's like, well, really? Is that like the recipe for
Horrible.
success or thriving? I mean,
Yeah. It's
you know,
horrible. It's like it's essentially, it's not saying, look, we're going to we're going to whip you if you don't do this work. It's saying we're going to starve you to death if you don't do this work. It's just another way of using a more a kind of ambiguous sort of violence to get people to do these jobs. Yeah, where and the other question that everyone has about universal basic income is where do these resources come from? Who pays for this? Is it an increase in taxes? Is it bringing money out of the military industrial complex and putting it into universal basic income?
we have so much money getting pumped through the system right now that people don't receive. Earlier in the pandemic last year, the CARES Act passed with a headline cost of $2.2 trillion. Now, I'm the math guy.
Yes.
$2.2 trillion is enough to give every American man, woman, and child in the country $1,000 a month for more than 6 months.
Wow.
That got spent, by the way, or authorized. Now we all didn't get $6,000. I think out of that act we got $1,200. The total number was around 17%. People got about 17% of that money. Now, where did the other 83% go? Banks, airlines, megacorps, oil companies, like wherever. It went into the pipes. It went into the system. That when we talked before about how it's like, oh, we're on this ride and like no one knows what to do. I think of it as a giant machine with these wheels grinding forward. And then everyone's like, well, can't do anything about it. This machine's just going to keep on grinding. and looking up being like, wait, shouldn't we maybe stop the grinding if it's going to lead us to violence and civil war over time and insanity and like misery and deprivation? And then people are like, no, can't stop the machine.
They are.
Yeah, I mean that's really the insanity of this, like this country at this place at this point in history.
Yes,
and I think people saw in me hope, because they're like, hey, this guy. I joked with someone else. It's like, that the machine wasn't behind me, because no one would send the anonymous Asian guy to Iowa and be like, oh, this will work. This is a good plan.
right.
Everyone knew that this was very much like a chance to interrupt the system.